we used to get told in the 70s and 80s that if you're having a negative thought, think of something positive.
Yeah.
The brain doesn't work like that. So what I do now when I go every 6 months to have skin checks, I always say to them at the end of it, thanks for saving my life, Doc. People say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. None of it. Go back to the very basics and change your behaviour within your behaviours. If we can remember and remind ourselves that we have control, and the number one control is breathing.
Kia ora, I'm Helen King, and you're listening to Cancer Conversations, the podcast you never thought you'd need for the diagnosis you never want to hear. This episode deals with sensitive topics including mental health and suicide. If you're struggling, there are resources listed in the episode notes of organisations that you can contact. We are ending the season with a fantastic guest. Like me, Lance Burdett has ADHD, and I often find people with ADHD cram a lot into life, and Lance is no different. After a distinguished career in the New Zealand Police, where he was once described as the most qualified and highly skilled negotiator, Lance now teaches people how to improve their mental health and resilience. His latest book is called Anxiety is a Worry, Understanding and Managing Anxiety, and it provides practical tools around managing anxiety, and you'll hear some of those within this episode. So we talk about how we can tackle anxiety, or in the cancer community it often manifests as scanxiety, how we can improve our sleep and work on negative self-talk. A massive thank you to Look Good Feel Better and Dry July for making this podcast possible. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to good podcasts.
Lance, welcome to Cancer Conversations. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So we are going to be traversing two topics that are close to my heart, of coping with anxiety and also how to sleep when you are dealing with difficult things. For myself, I am someone who has dealt with anxiety at different times in their life. I certainly had it through cancer treatment, and I don't think I slept a lot during cancer treatment either. So these are going to be wonderful topics to cover. But I think it would be really good if people don't know your background or haven't come across your story, to talk a little bit about how you came to be someone that teaches other people to have a better head, to be well in the head.
So, look, to be honest, you have to go through a journey yourself to know what it's like.
Yes.
You can learn from textbooks, but you have to be there. So I was a builder, and then at the age of 35 had this whole epiphany. Why don't you become a cop? Okay then, for an easy lifestyle. How did that work out for you? Well, I had a little bit of depression, if you can have a little bit of depression. But it was a wonderful career, and of course in that career was my role as the lead crisis negotiator for New Zealand Police. And it's fascinating when you start to learn. So part of my journey, I'd just become a crisis negotiator. I ended up with quite a deep into depression, and in fact was having, ideations, they're called thoughts of taking your own life. And it's in those moments that you don't learn then, you learn later. And so working through those, I started to learn about the brain. And then was able to become an even more, confident, and I'd like to think competent negotiator because of what I learned through my own process.
Yeah. It's interesting with depression, isn't it? Because I'm someone who has experienced depression probably since I was a teenager, and it is a really challenging state to pull yourself through, because it isn't just your mind, it is your physical health, it is the thoughts that are going through your head and just the way you experience the world. And I imagine as well for you, being a Kiwi man and working in the police force, which is a very masculine space, that coping with your mental health was probably had those other layers of challenge.
Yeah, it's not something that's talked about in the police in those days. It is now. They're getting a little bit better at it. So I was a baby boomer. The legacy of that was, harden up, toughen up, and all that sort of thing. And I remember speaking with my boss at the time. We were on a homicide inquiry, and when it was we'd arrested the people that were responsible. I said to him, do you think we could have a bit of a debrief, a psychological debrief, get somebody in and we just, as a team, just sit down and just talk about what our thoughts were, because it was quite an emotional one. There was a family involved and pretty traumatic. And he said, or we could go for a beer, Lance. And I said, well, yeah, there's always that, I suppose. And that was the way of dealing with it in those days. Wrong. And so the way I go about my work these days is I use some of those experiences. At that point, when I was at my lowest point, I managed to, like you say, it's hard to come out of that, and almost our mind is not ours. It's completely disconnected from who we actually are. It's not them.
No.
Because it's their thoughts at the time. And it is very common in cancer patients where they have those ideations and those thoughts. What for me it's an extreme state of fight or flight, right? So that when we go back to fight, flight or freeze, the brain is wired that way. I work in the area of neuroscience these days, which underpins psychology. And what it's showing is that when we get into an extreme stress state, we go into fight or flight. The first one being fight, and so you fight and you fight and you fight, and then a thought just pops into your head. And I knew, because I was trained as a crisis negotiator, that I had to go and get some help, which I did, and managed to work my way through. Toughest thing I've ever done in my life, apart from the worry about when I had cancer. So I had melanoma, and of course they didn't tell you have to go back twice to get it cut out. I was only told once, and so you go and you have it, and when it's healed, they let's do some more, and you're like, why? And so all that time, it's all very similar for me anyway, around the depression, that whole continuous thinking process. So that's the sort of journey I've been on to get to the end of my police career when I left, and now the work I do, I sort of relate it to that. So as a crisis negotiator, the way I stayed and the way I taught it at the police college was, it's a 3-step process in everything you do. So the hardest thing to teach police officers is not to be a police officer when you're doing a crisis intervention.
Yeah.
Don't be a cop. Question, answer. Doesn't work. What you do is you start off with what's going on right now. Take a step back. Get some more information. Get the story behind them. To get them to talk. 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? And you get a story from them. Right, how are we going to get you out of here? Whether it's a barricaded criminal, whether it's a hostage taker, whether it's somebody who's suicidal, it's exactly the same process. And that keeps you disconnected from the emotion. And it's no different to a cancer journey, as I see it. What's happening right now? What's some ways we can help ourselves that I have to find, not anyone else finds for me? Let you help me help myself.
Yeah.
Right, which is the wonderful work that Look Good, Feel Better does. Help me help myself. And what that does is it gives them a sense of control and ownership, and that's what we need in those situations, to know I've got this, it's mine, I'm going to be in control of it. And then how do I move forward on this? What's next? And so if you follow this methodical process, it almost disconnects you from the emotion, and it gives you something to do. It's no good sitting around, which is what the brain wants to do. Look, you've got a problem. Here's, stay awake. Why should we stay awake? But, well, I've got something on your mind that you might want to talk about. Would you shut up? It's actually you. And I talk about, so I didn't know this till fairly recently, that when I do workshops, I often talk about this thing. I didn't realise I was doing it, talking about myself in the third person.
Yeah.
But for me, the voice, because I have a can you have a little bit of ADHD? I've got a little bit of ADHD, and with that comes a little bit of OCD and a little bit of all sorts of things going on, right? So I have a lot happening in my life, in my head. But it's how do you control it? So you've got to work on something. You can work on worrying or work on what's worrying you. So it's having something to work on that you have control of, not what other people offer you. And I guess, and you've got to find your own way of doing that. And just recently, I was just mentioning before, I've had a blood test done fairly recently, which showed an abnormal blood count, and of course my brain just goes, here we go again, right? Because you always go, because my dad had cancers, and with that, and my wife has had the same, she's had melanoma, and here we go again. And so don't Google it.
No, never Google.
So I say this in my workshop. So you've got to remember, you've got to focus on yourself like you focus on others. We care more for others than we do ourselves.
Yeah.
We've got to be as patient with ourselves as we are with others, right? But we're not. And so off I go, and it says, this and that, and blood cancer, you've got bone cancer, you've got to... So I was talking to my wife about it. I said, I haven't heard from the doctor yet. I've really got to go and do something about this, because I want to know what I can do. And she said, didn't you see the letter? And I went, what letter? She said, you've got to open up another tab. So I opened up, and he said, there's nothing abnormal that I see in here. I went, oh.
Yes.
So worry does work.
I relate a lot to this. I have a lot of ADHD. So.
Yeah, no, the more you worry, the safer you are, right? That's the way the brain thinks. The more you worry, the safer you are.
Wow.
Because we learn to worry. We learn habits from dopamine. We only learn from one chemical, the neurotransmitter, which is just a chemical, and that is dopamine. So we learn to worry. So when you worry about something and it doesn't happen, you get rewarded from dopamine, the elation you get here. So the brain picks up on that and says, right, if you worry a lot, it won't happen. 90% of our worries are illogical, irrational.
Yeah.
There's no rational thought to it. But because we go into that risky state,
Yes.
we think, I've got to do something about this. And instead of reaching out to people, which is what we should do, and talk about it, we don't. We go into our own little world of, I'm going to find out the way of dealing with this myself.
When you have a diagnosis where, it's your life is at risk, that your instinct is to fight for your life.
Yes. This is the brain. It's got this whole weirdness about it. So the first thing is, we are all born to survive. We have two fears, a fear of falling
Yes.
and a fear of loud noises to keep us alive. Right, so that those two things keep us alive, but then we learn our fears. So for example, if you put a small child next to a swimming pool, because we're born curious, where do you think the child's going to end up? In the water. So we have to be careful until we learn how to, the risks. But we tend to learn by experimentation. But yeah, then you think to yourself, well, I don't really want to do this. Now, something I've learned fairly recently about the brain is that you should never push away unwanted thoughts. Judson Brewer, Dr. Judson Brewer, or Judd to his friends, as I found out I listened to him on Radio New Zealand. He wrote a book called Unwinding Anxiety. And the biggest takeaway for me on that book was, if you push something away, any thoughts, it will come back to you. The brain will hold on to it. So he's a psychiatrist, recognised psychiatrist. And I've tried it a few times. I've used it in real life situations.
Yeah.
Just recently, I got, a couple of years ago, caught in the floods, driving to a flooded road. The water was this high, car died. I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere, can't open the door. A flash flood came across the road, had to get rescued by fire service, taken back to a refuge centre, and tried to sleep, couldn't sleep, catastrophising. I remembered the thing that he'd said, so I sat with the whole negative thinking for about 10 minutes until I got to the point where I was like, I'm not feeling good. And I could, because you've had the depression, you go straight back there, and you think, I'm going down that hole again. Slowed my breathing down, and I fell asleep.
Wow.
I could not believe this. Then I woke up and there was thunder and lightning. I'm like, I'm not getting home for 4 days. I know what's going on. I've seen the Brendurbans. I went through it on the way up and I saw the hill coming down.
Yeah.
And I was like, And so I just sat with it for 5 or 10 minutes until it becomes so uncomfortable, slowed my breathing down, and for a second time, I fell asleep.
Yeah.
I woke up in the morning, it would only been an hour or so later, and I've never had a negative thought about that event, ever. In fact, I joke about it all the time. It's never come back as an intrusive thought, or, sometimes, I had a big fall on the roof once when I'm still recovering from it 2 years later. My rotator cuff completely destroyed it. And I still have that, just as I fall asleep, I have that,
Yes.
we have that, and I suddenly wake up because it's the sensation of falling on the roof. And it haunts me because I haven't sat with it. As soon as it happened, I just kept pushing it away because it was such a nightmare for me. Like it just was an instant pain, overwhelm, and I didn't sit and deal with it at the time. So this is the thing about it. If you keep avoiding, it's great to go for a walk if you're having negative thoughts, but you're avoiding it. So go for the walk after you've sat with it for 5 or 10 minutes, and then go for your walk.
My brain is just pinging off at the moment because I keep thinking back to things like going through cancer treatment is huge. And one of the things that I've shared before is that I had a lot of fear. Like I would wake up in a start like, I've got cancer.
Yeah.
And it was just, I was full of that, I guess it was a very traumatic thing. And I remember saying to my oncologist during an appointment, I'm really anxious. And he looked at me and he goes, why? And I thought,
Yeah.
this situation. But it's so interesting as you're talking. I was thinking, no one ever encourages you when you've had that diagnosis to actually just sit with it and go, what am I feeling? I'm feeling fear. Let yourself feel it. And I'm thinking, how different would that have been if there'd been that space, or I'd given myself the space to feel the fear that I was feeling, and how different that might have been even 6 years afterwards, because I had my yearly scans last week, and I lose it. Every year.
So I'm going for skin cancer treatments every 6 months.
Yeah.
And he starts off by getting out the cryo gun.
Yeah.
Shirt off.
Yeah.
Strip down on the bed, away you go, and off he starts blasting, right? And for me now, I see it differently.
Right.
I just, when I lie down there, I go, save my life.
Wow. I want to tease out this a little bit because I'm really intrigued by what you're saying. So you're giving yourself that space, like you're sitting there, you've just been through, a flash flood, which would have been...
It was scary. I've always been the rescuer, not the being rescued.
Exactly. So you just let yourself feel. How do you know when to stop? Did you set a timer?
No, it's just when you feel like you've had enough.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I felt like this is now unproductive. So I don't know if it's the ADHD I have, but I've talked with other people and they say no, it's the same thing. So we have this voice, or some people don't have an internal narrative they read, or some people have colours, so there's different ways that we do this. But essentially what we're doing is we all deal with it in the same way. So you get to a point where another voice, it's the same voice, comes in and says, this is a risk.
Right.
This is enough.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. It just says, unproductive, stop. And that's the voice, that's the gut instinct. Now, we are wired to worry anyway, that's what keeps us safe, right? So, but I'd rather worry on something productive than worry on nothing. So if you let it wash through you, if you let it, it's very much like they say with, I have never done meditation, but that's the same thing. You have a thought, you let it wash through you. Same sort of thing in general terms. The way the brain is wired is to avoid fear. So it's the brain stem, right? The brain stem has two purposes: keep us alive, keep us alert.
Yes.
The alive is all the bodily functions. The alert part is the brain looks for danger to avoid it.
Yeah.
All the time. Don't go down by the river. The last time you went down by the river, a crocodile came out and nearly ate you. So the brain registers river, crocodile, never go there. Doesn't remind you got through it. And so hence, when people come in for a second diagnosis
Yes.
of cancer and they get that, I've had it on the pod, on the chats, on the little workshops we've done. Somebody's come in and said, why do I feel worse for the second time when I know what to expect?
Yeah.
That's the problem. The brain knows where it was on the first time, and it just adds. So it's like a set of drawers, the file cabinet. That file cabinet comes open again,
Yeah.
and each time you go back for every year,
Yes.
the file cabinet opens and you're back in that spot, and it adds that additional fear of, but what now, and what now, and what now?
Yeah.
And so I'm very lucky. I didn't realise that with melanoma, there's quite a risk of getting it back,
Yes.
right? And I didn't know that. And so within 5 years, well, mine was 15 years ago. If I'd known that, every time I'd go back, I'd be probably going.
Yeah. Because that is a huge thing for people.
So sometimes too much knowledge is.
It's really hard because I
Ignorance is bliss, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm ignorant. Don't go looking down the doom hole. Just be ignorant.
Yes, because I'm thinking about that. I feel like one of the biggest anxieties I know for myself and other people I've met over the past 6 years of being in the cancer world is the fear of reoccurrence, or what we call scanxiety.
Yeah.
And it's that thing of it. And I was talking to a friend about this the other day, that part of it for me is that you can't tell me now, oh, it'll be fine, because my brain says to me, but remember, 6 years ago, it wasn't fine. And so I think that's the part of it that I've never been able to figure out of how do I not lose it every year when I go back and have my mammogram and those sorts of things, because it's one of the harder parts of post-treatment life, is dealing with the anxiety of this disease.
Only you can help you.
Damn it.
Only you can help you. You know, I see this all the time. You do you, babe.
Yeah.
And they're right. You do you, babe. And so all of us deal with these things in a different way.
Yeah.
But there's one little saying I like to say to people is, you can believe yourself or you can believe in yourself. And therein lies the difference.
Yeah.
If you truly believe in yourself that let's deal with this as it happens, hard to do, but only you can control your own thoughts. People saying they're trying to do the right thing, right? So here's some information for you. I've got a friend and they found this helpful. And, you know, you just want to just say, all sorts of words, right?
Yes.
Other than what you should really say, which is, I'm good, thank you. I've got my own information.
Yeah.
And I'm working with a specialist, but thank you anyway. So you have to learn how to deal with it in your own way.
Yeah.
No two people are the same. And we try to have this blanket, right? Now, so what happens with oncologists and any surgeons, right? So I've just recently, I had 2 stents done this year. And for them, it's just like going in to have an injection in your arm, right?
Yes.
And I'm lying, they give you this medication that you just go, can I have some of that before I leave? It just puts you in this wonderful place of, I don't care. And you watch it happen as they put this stent in. And it takes a long time. And then they say, right, see ya.
Yeah.
And it's like, is that it? And they don't, it's just for them, it's just another day in the office, right? And in fact, they were saying, I heard him say that I had to have 2 at the same time because they had to come in from both sides to unblock it. So one surgeon's going through the arm, and the other one's going through the groin area. And I heard him say, as you pull it out, the catheter, make sure it doesn't get caught because you'll snare the vein, and then we'll have to go. And I just said, I'm awake.
Yeah. Don't say that.
And the last one I had, he was pulling it all out, and he says, "Oh, you're going to hate me for this," to everyone in the room. I don't hate you, doc. I love your work. And they don't realise that you're there and listening to them. They forget that whole thing. So this is it, right?
Yeah.
People are people, and we have to remember that. People are, and we all worry in different ways. We all have different fears.
Yeah.
Fear keeps us safe. It's a normal thing. It's processed in the same part of the brain, in the limbic system.
Yes.
So if we can remember and remind ourselves that we have control, and the number one control is breathing. And the one that I like people to do, and I do it whenever we do our sessions, our workshops online, is to just slow your breathing down and you get into a 6-second cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back in time to hymns, chants.
Yeah.
The 6 seconds is, opera. They're all based on, and they say, oh, you should sing opera. It's really good for you. Well, you don't want to hear it from me singing. But it's just that whole 6 second in, 6 seconds out.
Yeah.
Don't hold your breath. Slow it down. Slowing the breathing slows the heart, slows the head. And what that does is put you into the alpha zone every so often, where the brain stops thinking. So that's how it works. Now, you don't have to stick to the 6 seconds. So all I did there was let it happen and then slowed my breathing. See, that we used to get told in the 70s and 80s that if you're having a negative thought, think of something positive.
Yeah.
The brain doesn't work like that. We know through neuroscience, brain imaging,
Yeah.
it's a different part of the brain.
Yeah.
So when you're in that negative fight or flight, the only way to come out of that is to slow the breathing down. And I've actually done it with a crisis intervention, suicide intervention with somebody. We don't count. You just set up your phone to beep, just a little vibrate, just a little tat every 6 seconds. And you just sit there, hand on it, just vibrating it, and you just in and out.
Yeah.
And you cannot overdo that breathing exercise. In fact, the more you do it, the more the brain will relax. Look, it's natural for people to worry. It's normal. In fact, if we don't have stress of some sort, perhaps not to the extreme like we're talking about, unless you have that, your brain doesn't develop.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
It needs to work.
Yeah.
And every time you do something and you have a new challenge, we learn something from it. So the way that I do it these days is, what did you do well? What would you do differently next time? Right? So if next time you go back for treatment, or think back to the last time, what did you do well in that treatment? So now next time, just reassure yourself, slow your breathing down and go, and so what I do now when I go every 6 months to have skin checks, I always say to them at the end of it, thanks for saving my life, Doc. Because each time it's saving your life. And that's what you've got to remember, that it's part of the journey now, and it's not, you don't live with it, it is you, and you learn how to deal with it in a way that's against what the brain says. You should worry more about this because you have to go back again.
Yeah.
No, I'm going there for a clearance.
And it's really interesting what you're saying before about your brain almost being, I guess, that dopamine of worry. And I wonder, I'm thinking about for myself and my experience of, is there almost a safety in that? Because it's like, this thing threatened my life.
Yes.
And now I feel uncertain in the world.
Yes.
And so I can control that by being super worried.
So when you worry, you get cortisol, right?
Yeah.
So which is a stressor. It's just a release of sugars into the blood to heighten everything. And so when it doesn't happen is when you get your reward. So the way to change that is you get the dopamine when you stop worrying at the start.
Right.
So the way the brain's wired, get to the top of the mountain,
Yeah.
and I'll give you the reward.
Yeah.
Get to the end of the treatment, you'll get the reward. When you get the result back, I'll give you the dopamine. Now, if we can change that to, instead of getting at the top of the mountain, planning, preparation, training and exercise and all that, and getting up and have a little up the mountain,
Yeah.
that's how to retrain the brain. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, the only one we learn from. So we learn to procrastinate.
Yep.
You think to yourself, I've got something to do at work in the office. I'll do it straight after this. You've made a decision, dopamine. You then go and sit at your desk and you think, there's a couple of emails there, I'll do those first to clear my... Dopamine, you've made a decision. It's nearly, I'll go and have a cup of coffee, then I'll be dopamine. Then you think, actually I'll be good first thing in the morning, I'll do it then. So we learn to procrastinate. So the way to overcome that is start it and just do a little bit and get the reward. then do a bit more and get the reward. So the same thing with worry. The more you worry, the more dopamine you get for worrying.
Wow. Yeah.
For when it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So each time it doesn't happen, you get that major reward of dopamine. The brain says, see?
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, because as you're talking about that, like I think anxiety and depression for me go hand in hand. Sometimes if I've had a highly anxious time, I know
Absolutely.
what's to come is often a depression, and depression can be so savage, you know, that unrelenting, and it's that voice in your head.
It's second by second, isn't it? You
Yeah.
can't tell people that. It's second by second.
Yeah.
You just survive to breathe.
Yes, absolutely.
You survive, not breathe to survive, you survive to breathe.
Yeah.
It's just weird. It's horrible.
It is a really unrelenting condition to be in, and I think if you're someone who has experienced it multiple times, sometimes it can feel harder to, it's like, right, now it's another time.
See the second time, the third time, the
Yeah.
fourth time.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is just opening up that filing cabinet. Here it go again.
Yeah.
Open it up. And that this is true. Now, so my next book that's coming out is on anxiety. And it does follow that tendency. So it starts with fear.
Yes.
Fear causes the anxiety, which causes the fear,
Yes.
which causes the anxiety. And so it goes. And the more you do that, therefore catastrophizing starts to come in, and then the downward spiral starts. And because we've been doing it with the brain is now learning a new pattern. So we can unlearn that. Well, you can't unlearn something.
Right.
So the brain, the memory is held by two things: the emotion at the time the event happens, or repetition. So when you think about that repeated behaviour, going back to, I hope you don't mind the example of you, that when you go back every year for the check, you're just repeating that known pathway.
Yes.
So the way to change that pathway is follow it, go with it, and at the very end, just change it a little bit.
Yeah.
And when you change it, acknowledge that you've changed it. So it might be you think, yeah, but I got through those.
Yes.
This is my 5th time. This is my 5th year. And if you get the reward there, you join a new connection. It's called a synapse, right? Synapse connections. And so a neuron, and there's billions of them, look sort of like oak trees, and they join onto the roots of another oak tree. And that's it. So you go along that, and and that's how you change a habit.
Yeah.
You don't change the habit by changing everything about the habit. You follow your habit and just do something small, and the smaller and smaller you do it consecutively, has the biggest impact on you long term. So you can retrain the brain, and we know this. There's a great book written by SOUSA, Seltzer, I forget his first name. It's in its 6th edition, I think, 6th printing, and he's updated it, about learning from dopamine. And he says exactly that. We shouldn't be trying to just learn something new. We should follow the same pathway and then just go off in a slight direction each time. And that's how the brain works, and it's absolutely nailed it for me.
Yeah.
You've got to keep reminding yourself, though, that's the problem. It's so easy to slip back into that known pathway.
Yeah.
And somebody actually you have to ring somebody or talk with somebody and go, so next time you have that, you contact me, send me a message, and I'll go, what number are you up to now? Helen?
Yes.
What number are you up to, Helen? Tell me. What number checkup is this? Oh, well, so you've been through this a few times then?
Yeah.
Wow. Here we go, eh?
You said something before that I think was really interesting, and also something that I started thinking about during treatment, because I lived by myself, so I spent a lot of time. It was a terrible situation to be in my head all the time. But I guess at the point where I could sort of go out in public and that sort of thing, because I had very heavy duty chemo, so I was very ill. But I'd look forward to being able to walk to the shops and have a coffee. And what it was that I was having connection Like even just someone saying hello was all of a sudden, it was like,
Yes.
oh wow, someone's
Yes.
acknowledging me. And I think that is a really good point, especially after what we've experienced with the pandemic, is that we've lost connection with our community. And I know online is great in many ways, but I think what it misses out is the sitting opposite another person and going, I see you. I can...
This is it, and again it comes back to the chemicals in the brain. If you don't get out, if you don't talk, a particular chemical called tachykinin is produced in your brain, and tachykinin causes fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
And so we do need it. So all these neurochemicals, all these neurotransmitters, these chemicals in our brain, we do need. Tachykinin we need, but not as much. So if you isolate and worry and don't connect and don't express that emotion, the tachykinin starts to get produced more and more and more. Now what the research is finding out, the longer you do this, long term it causes paranoia.
Wow.
So we have to have connection. Now you think about it. I do. You know, when I was in my depression, I couldn't tell anyone what I was doing because no one would. And why would I? They think I'm broken. I feel broken. I'm a man. I'm a cop. I shouldn't be like this. That's what you tell yourself. So you just don't do it. And the longer you isolate and don't. So what kept me safe was being at home with people around me, so I had some normality around, although my behaviours were abnormal, it was normality. And in fact, I know that that's what saved me, was being with people. So
Absolutely.
we are social species.
Yeah.
Oxytocin is produced when we connect, like-minded people like you and I are. We are getting oxytocin and our brains are changing.
Yeah.
As I learn from you, you learn from me, that whole connection with people is what we must do. And oftentimes it can often be talking with a stranger even.
Yeah.
You know, that's why going to, counselling. Well, I like to think of counselling differently. So I ask people, how many of you have been for physio? And everyone's really proud. I've been for, oh, so you've had therapy. No, I haven't. Well, it's called physiotherapy. Oh, what do? They push on the part that hurts. Why? To cause a little bit of angst. To get your things moving again. What do these people do?
Yeah.
They push on the part that hurts. So you're actually going for brain physio.
Yes.
So go and take some. And often with a person that you have a real good connection with, but doesn't know you intimately, you share more about you than you would with anyone else, because you don't have that fear of holding back.
Yeah.
And that's what produces dopamine. And that's what gives us oxytocin, and that's what gives us endorphins. So all of those three chemicals, and plus the serotonin, if you can get all four of those, and serotonin comes from diet, you're in a good space.
I think how different it can be when you make those connections.
Yeah.
So for me, I say I'm living my best middle-aged lady life at the moment, because I'm doing a writing course and I'm going to do a painting course. But what I know it is for me at the moment is that I need that connection. I need to get up and go and be around people. And I think it's really hard if you are depressed, because your head is telling you that you're not worth it, or you're shit, or you're all of those things.
So that's because you're not sleeping, right? So when we sleep, two things happen. When we go through our REM cycles, number one, the brain consolidates the memory from the day before. So a short-term memory lasts until we go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then it consolidates, and it throws out the rubbish that the brain doesn't need. So it actually goes through a pruning process in our brain.
Wow, yeah.
And so if you don't get 6 hours unbroken, 7 hours broken sleep, you haven't gone through 3 REM cycles. So it's a minimum of 3 REMs we must go through.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that, you start to berate yourself, because all that's happening is the rubbish, the negative self-talk, builds up because you haven't dealt with yesterday's stuff. You've got to take out the trash every night.
That's very
true. If you don't take the trash out every night, there's a bin full of rubbish at the end. In 2 or 3 days' time, it's across the kitchen floor, and you've got to really get a shovel out. So that's what you have to do. You've got to concentrate on sleep. So it's those 3 things of food, shelter, sleep. You get those 3 things right, the old Maslow, and you start to feel safe and secure, and then you can connect with others.
Yeah.
And when we connect with people, when you talk, read, write, you talk, you get the oxytocin. When you read some information that's valid, and much sure you go to validated sites on that, you give, and then you write yourself a plan. And each time you tick something off that plan, you get the dopamine, and that's how we learn to live in this new world and learn to deal with troubles that we have when we're going through. You know, it always comes back to the very basics. People say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. None of it. Go back to the very basics and change your behaviour within your behaviours. What's natural behaviour for you? Just change something small within each one of those major and start again. You can actually restart and learn.
Yeah. Well, Lance, I feel like my head has slightly been fixed. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
If people want to read more of your work or hear more of what you have to say, where can they find you?
So I do a lot of podcasts. I don't do them personally, but I get invited to do them, so they're out there. But I've got my third book's coming out now, so the last one, called Dark Side of the Brain, does talk about suicide and how to manage, but a whole lot of other things in depression. But this one is about managing anxiety that's coming out, and I'm a little bit proud of it. It's taken 4 years, and they, you know, a couple of the last 2 years before it got, is now the right year, Lance? I said, no, it doesn't feel right for me. And this year it felt so right, because I went back through it about 3 or 4 times, and it's the first time that no one's really touched my writing.
Wow.
But yeah, it's been a journey, so you know, people are welcome to reach out. We've got sleep tips documents on there that it's free for everybody. Just go to our website, but they'll find me, I'm sure. Or come into one of the sessions from Look Good, Feel Better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every now so often I pop my head up. Hi.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you.
Thanks for joining me. If you want to find out more about what's on offer from Look Good, Feel Better, head over to www.lgfb.co.nz. If you haven't already, go back and listen to earlier episodes, share with your friends and family, or give this episode a like. This really helps other people find the podcast. A huge thank you to Evan Payer, Abby Williams, and of course, Look Good, Feel Better and Dry July. And thank you, dear listeners, the people that listen every week, reach out via social media and let us know that you're enjoying it. It's just such a pleasure to be able to create this resource for anyone that has been impacted by cancer.